Okay, we're in recording number 2. I will go ahead and share screen. You guys are doing great about letting me know when the screen freezes up. Keep doing that, please. So we have done, what have we done? Where am I? There I am. Okay, so we've mainly done backgrounds. We did background image, we did, which we actually did on Tuesday, background color, and then we did a background gradient, linear gradient, and then we did borders on stuff using border block and just border property, border left, etc. So now we're on to margin and padding. We've done a few things with these already. So we did on the body element, we did a margin 0 auto to get it centered within the page. I just like to point out that without a width or max width, it's not going to look like this does anything. Just for a moment, let me just X this line here and save it. If I go back over here, and where am I? There I am. You might say, Margin, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to center it in the page? Like, what's it doing? Well, it actually is kind of centered in the page. It's just also taking up the full width of the page, right? Remember, auto, if the browser doesn't feel like there's any room to add a margin, then it's just going to make it 0. That's the auto margin value is for something that's just 0. It's when we add that extra line of code in there to give this a width or a max width. Why it has to do that every time? Then you actually get some visible, difference from what it was. So we did that, and then I think that's all we've done really with margins or padding. The only other thing we did, we haven't done anything else. So the only other thing we did was to do a quick reset on the thing, or zeroing as it's really called, by taking the margin and padding down to 0 for everything, using the splat selector, the universal selector, to grab everything and just remove all of the spacing that the browser is putting on stuff. And just getting rid of it all so we can start from 0, start from scratch. So that's what we'll do. We got to go ahead and start bringing some of those back in again. So let's start with this train wreck of a header right here. Now I know it might look like this logo is slightly to the right of center. From experience, that's generally just because the text is all over here, which makes it look like the image is being pushed to the right. I believe it actually is directly in the center. So let's get some padding around this header here so that we can actually see the logo. One, yeah, half the logo is being lost down here. And we also don't want it to be right behind the text. So let's go ahead and start just by giving a simple padding all the way around on the header element. So I tend to use ems for these things, these kinds of measurements, because it's a typographic unit of measurement. And I think generally when I think of spacing, I think in terms of the type. I think in terms of the multiples of the basic font size of 16 pixels or larger than that if it's larger for the headings and so on. There is something called a rem, by the way, a root M, where it just goes by the 16 pixels for everything instead of resizing the M based on what the size of like the H1 or H2 or H3 is or whatever. If that makes more sense to you, then you can use rems instead of Ms. They have good browser support at this point. I'm just going to use Ms here. I already used them once here in order to get the background of the header pushed a little bit away from the top. So let's go ahead and try a little bit more here. And I'll just do some padding on the header. So first, to start with, we'll do 1 unit of measurement all the way around. Let's just start with 1M and see what happens. I doubt that's going to be enough. In fact, I know it's not going to be enough. But let's try it. So the header, try padding 1M, save it, and go back over here. And you can see, yes, it's just pushing things away from the wall a little bit. It did not make the header any larger. It didn't push the border out from the text. It pushed the text in from the border, right? So it's spacing on the inside of the element like we were saying at the beginning. So I think we're going to want a little bit more than 1. In fact, I think 3 is probably more likely. 3M. Okay, so that pushes things well away from the sides. A couple of things need to happen here, though. I think that one, we need more space up top because we still need to push the text away from the background logo. So we need to push the text down, but that means also making the margin or the padding a little bit smaller here because otherwise we're going to get too much room down here. So here's where we're going to wind up using one of those shorthands where we've got like multiple values separated by spaces within the same padding property. So basically what I'm going to want is I'm going to want a large value on padding top to push the text down from the logo. And then I'm going to want a padding amount that's the same left and right for the not the margins, but you know, the gutter on the side there. So I want another value for left and right. And then I'm going to want another value for the bottom here that's going to be smaller than any of them. It's not a bad idea when you're getting used to the way these things work and how these multiple values work by going ahead and just in a comment, just type out what it is you're trying to accomplish. Yeah, I want one value for the top, another one for left and right, and another one for the bottom. Okay, cool. Now I remember how to do that. So it's going to be the first value, 6M. I've decided it's going to be enough to get that pushed away from the logo. Let's try it. I'm going to save it. And yep, that pushes it down past the logo, but then look how much space we've got here now. So let's put in the 3M is fine for left and right. Let's get a small value for the bottom of 1M. Yeah, there we go. It might be a little tight, but it's roughly matching the top there, so I think it's okay to start with at least. So that's the way it works. So we specified 3 values. The first value is the top, the second value is left and right, the third value is the bottom. Now we already saw what happened with 2 values in the margin. We did margin 0 auto for the body element. The 0 is top and bottom, and the auto is left and right. We already talked about that. So that's what happens if you have 2 values. 3 values, top, then left and right, and then bottom. Okay, so let's see. Let's also do the main. So when I'm doing kind of, I start trying to line things up. Alignment is important in web design and graphic design in general. So whatever I did here, I've got 3 M's. I want to also have 3 M's over here so that the text lines up with this header text and it goes all the way down to the images and so on. It'll make a nice strong alignment line for me. So let's go down to main. Here it is. I'll actually put it up at the top of this little section here since it's a large element. And let's go ahead and just start with padding. And I'm going to start this by doing 3M. Right? Start with one value all the way around and then see what needs to happen to it from there. So now, things line up nicely up and down here. I'm not sure if this is now too much space in here. Look how there's kind of a small amount of space here and then this big gap there. And probably, yeah, I'm getting a pretty big gap on the bottom too. So I like the 3M left and right, but I'm probably going to want a smaller one, top and bottom. Not too small though. Let's just try 2M. So remember the commenting thing. I want one value for top and bottom, and then another value left and right. And that's the order that it has to be in for 2 values. So 3M is for left and right. So I put the next value before that one, 2M for top and bottom, 3M for left and right. Let's see how it looks. It certainly looks better, right? If I go down to 1M, let's try it here. It might be too tight. Yeah, I think that's too tight. I don't like how these are bracketing this border here. I think this needs to be uneven. So I think 2M is the way to go for now, at least. That looks comfortable. And that'll get us started off with the main. I'm just doing the big ones, header and main, and then the third big one is footer down here. Now footer is the one that's most desperately in need after the header because that's just way too tight there. But for this one, I think we can do something really simple. I think for the footer, let's see, we're at main and footer, so, oh, I've already got a footer down here, cool. I'm going to do just a padding and then give it a smaller amount, like 1M. And this one, we can just do the same amount all the way around, I think. It just works. And there it is. Look how much nicer that looks, right? If you feel like that's too wide, you can do 0.5M and see how that looks. Let's see here, 0.5M. Yeah, that works fine too. It's a little bit tighter. I think I like the 1M, but either one works. There we go. Okay, so those are the 3 big ones. Well, 5, I guess, if you count HTML and body, and then header and main and footer. Those are our big kind of structural elements and document elements there. So let's go into some of the text elements here. So my first thing for the text element is that these two guys are too close together. Remember that these guys got smashed together when we did that zeroing, right? When we did splat selector and removed the margins and padding from everything. These guys got too close together. So we could either go to site ID, which is the big H2, and do a padding bottom or margin bottom. Or we could go to the tagline and do padding or margin top. Either way would be perfectly fine. It would have the same result. So
Mr. Bispo, can you go to line 96?
This guy right here?
Yeah, just give me 1 second here.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. Okay, let's see. I see the site ID first, so we'll go ahead and put that. So like I was saying, in this case, all we're doing is spacing. You can use either a margin or padding for this. I think margin would probably make more sense, but really either one will have exactly the same effect, as far as I know. So we don't need much space. I'm just going to use half an M to try to push those guys away from each other. So I'm going to do like a margin bottom now. I don't need margin on the rest of it, just on the bottom to push down the H3 a little bit. So I'll start with 0.5M and see how that looks. And yeah, that's fine. That might even be a little bit much. Doesn't need much, but I'll go ahead and leave it at that. No, actually, that's probably a good amount right there. Periodically, it's a good idea just to go ahead and cram this into a really small size and make sure it's still working. So, okay, so take a look at this. You see how San Joaquin Valley Town Hall is getting pushed onto two lines when I pull it into this really tight view? That's probably, I mean, this is probably tighter than I'm going to have to worry about anybody actually viewing my web page in, but nevertheless, I'm probably going to take down the size of that big H2 just a touch, just to make sure that that doesn't happen. So where it's the site ID actually. So we specify this is 170% because that's what the textbook says. Let's take it down to 160%. Let me make sure nothing else is at 160%. I want to maintain my hierarchy. And no, nothing else is. I think the next thing down is the 150% of this H1. So let's try taking this down to 160% and see if that fixes it. Okay, so 160% just made it a touch small, just a skosh smaller. And did I not save it? Let's see, yeah, I saved it. Hang on a second. Yeah, it's definitely smaller. I thought 160 was going to do it. Let's see if 150 does it. No, even that doesn't do it. Okay, well, you don't want to take it down too far, so it starts competing with the other text on the page. I'm going to put it back up to 160, and at some point I'm actually going to check the pixel widths in here and see what's actually happening, and see if 160 will actually be, because this might be like a really tight size here. I'm guessing that it's tighter than I'm thinking because I'm using the left tabs on Edge here. So after we take a break, I'll pop into some other browsers and check some actual widths and see what's happening here. But it's a good thing to keep checking on. In fact, it's not a bad idea just to kind of leave this down here. I mean, I'll fix that much, but this is what people will see on handheld devices when they come to your website. So it's not a bad idea to start from here and not worry about wider widths until we get to next week and get to like responsive design. Okay, so let's see. What about the next ones? The next ones are the H2s inside the main, which are basically just these two. This one's an H1. And the H2s here, I think, we just put some margin at the top and bottom. It's not a bad idea to put a little more above than below for these guys to make sure that the heading is visually connected with the text that follows it instead of the text that precedes it, because that's the way that the text is actually organized. Let's put a margin equally above and below to start with and see how it looks. So these are going to be the main H2s. And let's see, what should we do? Let's go ahead and put 0.5 M here. So I'll put margin. Now remember, adding this top and bottom. So I can do 0.5 M and then 0 for the second value, because the first one is going to be top and bottom, and the second one is left and right. Let's use a semicolon. Right, so 0.5 M and 0 will put 0 left and right, which is what I want, but it will put a little bit top and bottom. Let's try it out here. So what's going on? Why is it showing me a dot here? Oh, I don't have a colon, that's why. Hello. You guys are supposed to catch that stuff. What happens when I type too fast? There we go. So yeah.
Hey, you don't have a colon.
What's that?
I said you didn't have a colon.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll fix that.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Cool.
Better late than never.
Right. Okay, so top and bottom. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's okay. But visually, there's not like a really clear separation here between which, should this go with the text preceding or afterwards. So what you might do is do a separate amount top and bottom. You might do, I don't know, instead of doing it like this, we might just do a margin top, so that we're only putting that extra margin on top and not below, like that, and that feels a little too tight. But you know what, let's go with this for right now. And the reason why is because we still have to add some margin to the paragraphs and so on, and that will actually add a little bit more spacing in here, I believe. So let's go ahead and try that first before we go any further. We'll try this and see how it goes. But before we do that, let's deal with this H1. Remember we did this border like right on top of the H1, and it's just kind of sitting there, right? They're just almost touching each other. They would be touching each other if any of the characters were a little bit higher. So let's go ahead and deal with that, and that's going to be simple enough. This is going to be the H1, and all we have to do is add a little bit of padding on top. So padding top, and then, I don't know, let's try the 0.5 M again. All right, so that gets us separated out. I think that works. That kind of matches. You wouldn't want to do more than that unless you also put more above that line. But I think that's going to work. Okay, so now let's add some extra spacing around the paragraphs and the UL. So let's see, let me check what selectors we've got here. This is main. We do have a selector for, well, we have one for PUL block quote main H3. We really only want 2. And in fact, we have to specify main P because we don't want to start adding extra spacing to the footer P. That's already got some padding on it. So let's make another selector here, and it's going to be main P and UL.
Mr. Bispo, can you go back to H1?
Yes. There it is. So I added this line right there.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right, you got it. Is that the last? That's the last thing we did before this, right? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so let's see. The next thing that I did was make a new selector for main P and UL. Remember that this compound selector, if you have a space separating between them, it means that this is just paragraphs that are inside the main element. So it will ignore the paragraph that's inside footer, which is all I'm trying to do. That's why you just make this selector a little bit more specific, and then you can, kind of zero in on exactly what elements you want to be selecting for. The UL doesn't matter. It's the only UL that we've got. If later on we wind up using unordered lists for the navigation, which the textbook does and which I don't like to do, for reasons we'll talk about. But if we wind up doing that, then we'll have to come down here and make this more specific and also do like main UL for this to like differentiate it from navigation, or vice versa. Maybe we'll do nav UL for other rules. But let's go ahead and do margin, mirroring margin. And once again, we'll do the two values. We don't want to add anything left and right. We want to add top and bottom. So I will do 0.5 top and bottom, and then 0 left and right. And see how it just pushed that a little bit away from the heading there and there. That's what I wanted. And, theoretically, you might have more than one paragraph on another page. We don't on this one. Let's go ahead and add an extra paragraph here. Just a moment. You guys shouldn't do this, but let's see. I'm just going to add another paragraph here. I'm just going to copy and paste this underneath itself so we can see what it looks like with multiple paragraphs. Then go back over here. And you see that now adds just a touch of paragraph spacing between the paragraphs as well. So a design student might ask, okay, so how much paragraph spacing should there be? And there isn't a hard and fast rule about that. I guess my real answer is enough paragraph spacing so that the reader knows when a new paragraph is started. If it's too tight, then they won't know. If it's too much, then it's overkill, right? So this is probably enough. It's maybe a little bit tight. Maybe I should do like 0.75 M or something like that instead. But I generally like to err on the side of too narrow as opposed to too wide, because too wide can look goofy and interrupt the flow of scanning. So anyway, we just have the one paragraph here for now, but not a bad idea to test it. We probably will have multiple paragraphs on another page at some point. Okay, so those guys there, the main P and the UL, we did the H1. Yes, we did. And let's do that block quote. That's what I've had my eye on the whole time. So I definitely need more padding on the inside of that border because this looks really ugly and it's hard to read. Generally speaking, putting borders around things is dangerous because it always makes them harder to read. So you usually want to put in like a nice big load of padding around, on the inside of the border, and probably some margin around it as well. It's looking awfully tight in there. So let's go ahead and select for the block. Oh, we've got a selector here. Good. Of course we do. We did the border and the border left. So let's do the padding first.
I think generally it looks better when you center the text for a quote as well.
It might be. Yeah, it's a possibility. I don't know. We'll try it. Let's do the padding first. And well, let's start with 2M and see if it feels like it's enough or too much or what. So padding 2M, might be okay. Let's try the centering thing. I'm not sure about that, especially since sometimes on the web you can't really control these runts where you wind up with one word on a line by itself. Someone's going to pop in with the browser exactly the wrong width, and you're going to wind up with a runt at the end of the paragraph no matter what you do. And then
that's a good point.
When you're centered, it can look kind of weird. But let's try it and see. So I'll put it underneath font style. We'll do text align, center, and then, yeah, I don't know. I think you've got a good point though, that it can work better for callouts and quotes and image captions and things like that.
Yeah, it's got a good way of saying, "Hey, look at me. I've got a purpose."
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to put it back again, but I'm going to keep that in mind as a possibility. I'm not going to get rid of that. I'm going to comment it out.
It's really all preference is really all it is. You know what I mean? It makes no damn difference. It looks just as good that way. So.
And so often it comes down to what the client wants, whether they're being logical or not.
Right.
Let's go ahead and let's do something fun with this. Let's go ahead and call some more attention to this. So I'm going to show you just a trick that a lot of people do for these kinds of call out quotes, these block quotes. And it's going to mean messing around with the HTML, unfortunately, but sometimes you do it. So let me get this guy wrapped here so we can actually see. Oh, it is being wrapped. Okay. So here's the block quote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the closing quote here. Where's my cursor? There it is. So I'm going to get rid of the right double quote at the end. And the left double quote at the beginning, I'm just going to wrap a span around it. So I've got the opening and closing span tags, and I'm going to cut and paste this left double quote special entity right in there. Speaking of which, I saw another place that had a, was it the H1? Yes, it was the H1. This ugly straight quote here. Let me go ahead and put a special character. You guys don't need to do this if you don't want to, but we did the right and left double quotes. You've also got single quotes, so instead of like a left double quote, you can do an LS for single quote. But I'm going to do a right single quote here, and take a look here, and you see how that's now just a curly apostrophe instead of the straight apostrophe. It just looks better. So anyway, so okay, we've got a span around the left double quote, which is right at the beginning here. So this will actually be good. This will be a good excuse to try a little bit with display. So what I want to do is I want to take this quote and I want to put it on its own line and make it a lot bigger. So that
That's
it's like
actually
starting
super cool.
with
I didn't realize that. I said I didn't realize you could do that. That's super cool.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so
Mr. Bispo, can you go back to the HTML?
yes. So the main thing that I did was putting the span around that left double quote there.
Right. Okay. So it's span and then ampersand, one either single or double.
It's
Cool.
L actually for left.
Oh, L. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, it's either
Right.
left
So
or right.
left, right, and then does it do top? Well, I guess top and bottom wouldn't. That wouldn't make sense. Anyways, okay. Moving on.
If you guys want, somewhere I could dig up for you a PDF that I've got of how to get a whole bunch of these for web.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Yeah, if you don't mind looking, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you guys remind me, I certainly don't mind looking. I should have it on my other machine over here. All right, cool. So yeah, I put a span around the left double quote here. And so what I'm going to do, now that I've got the span there, I've got the ability to move this up and do whatever I want with it. By the way, there's another way you can do this without messing with your HTML at all, using a pseudo selector, but I don't want to go into that right now. Maybe if we have time later. So let's go ahead and select for the span that's inside the block quote. You guys know how to do that. Block quote space span as the compound selector. So select the span that's inside the block quote. And let's give this guy a font family of, well, this is like one of the few times when I actually like times here. So we'll do font family times and font size, I don't know, 3M. Let's see here. So I'm making it a lot bigger. Let's make it 4Ms. Or 5Ms, why not? Nice and big. And let's give this a color of Gainsborough to match the borders. I just did a little smiley there without meaning to. Okay. And then the one thing, even though it looks like it's upstairs here, it's actually still part of the same line there, right? That's why it's pushing the E of each over. We don't want that. So here's where we do the box model thing of the display property. So we will do a display, and two of the most fundamental ones are display block and display inline. I think I mentioned those before. So right now, the span, it's an inline element. And what that means, it's inside the paragraph, right? And it does not start and end on its own line. It's just part of this line of text here, right? That's what inline means. It's in line with the rest of the text. Display block is like the paragraph has a display block by default on it. It starts and ends on its own line, right? It's not next to anything else. Now we could put it next to other things by using CSS, but by default, the display block means that it starts and ends on its own line. It's its own block of stuff here. Nothing else is next to it. So let's do that to this guy. We're going to do a display block just for that span. And when we do that, it winds up on its own line up here. And I'm not actually sure if I like the times or not. Let's try it with just the same typeface that we're using here. No, I think I like times better. There we go. So that's something I was not planning, but that's kind of a fun little trick. So here it is, if anybody needs a little bit more time with that guy. But that all depends on, in this technique, that depends on being able to put the span in there in the HTML first. And sometimes you can't. If you're working on a team, sometimes you literally do not have any control over the HTML. It's handed to you, and you, with strict instructions not to alter it in the single smallest little character. And then you got to make do with what you got. And sometimes it's bad.
They always say if you want it done right, do it yourself.
That's right.
Can you scroll down a little bit, Mr. Bispo?
Like that?
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, I totally will not be grading your guys' submissions on that little block quote trick there. I just wanted to show you that because we were talking about bringing a little more attention to it. Before I look for that PDF, I'll check and see if there might be a page on like CSS tricks or something like that that just has a long list, in which case I'll just throw it into the useful links page.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I appreciate that.
Of course. Okay, how's everybody doing? We're almost done here. I just want to format those figures with the images inside of them. Using the last of the CSS box model properties that I wanted to show you guys, which is float. Using float for what they're built for, which is to take the images and wrap text around them. In this case, this H3 with the line break in it, I want to float to the side. So this is why I kind of fussily said, well, we need to do something other than what the textbook did. The textbook had put the images after the H3, and I said, no, we got to put the images before the H3. And even if you're not planning on floating, it's just, I don't know, it's a good practice to be in, because who knows, you might want to float them. And if you have the images after the H3s and you can't touch the HTML at some point, then, or don't want to, then you're going to be sunk. Then you're going to have to jump through a lot of extra CSS hoops in order to get this done. That's not doable. It's doable, but it's a lot easier if you have the images before the text that follows. Just kind of a common practice thing. So let's take a look at it here. So we're going to be doing, I guess we need another section. We haven't done any CSS at all to those images or the figures. So let's go ahead and just make another section here in our CSS. So I'll just call this figures or images or pics or something like that. Gallery, that would make sense. Or guest speakers, whatever makes sense to you. And I am going to select for figure image, img, is the element on the HTML. Now I'm being fussy with this and not just saying img because we'll almost certainly at some point wind up with an image somewhere on some page that's not in a figure. You don't have to use figures for all of your images. And so it makes sense for me to just go ahead and do figure image right now, just so that we don't have to worry about like specificity issues later on. So figure image, and let's go ahead and do a float property. And there's a few different values you can do. You can float them left, in which case the text will wrap around them to the right. You can float them right, in which case the text will wrap around them to the left. In fact, I believe those are the only two possibilities that you've got. There is no float center, because then you'd have text wrapping on both sides of it, which really would not do anybody any good. So let's go ahead and put these float left. Now, just to let you know, this is going to break everything. Just kind of like when we zeroed out the margins and padding on the page here, right? Here's what it looks like at first. I told you that floats are a bit troublesome. A float takes a look at everything on the HTML page that happens after that image and says, okay, I'm going to float everything to the right of that, including the following images and the following H3s and all this stuff, and you get this kind of weird thing happening here. I've seen a lot worse than this too. So let's go ahead and remember the property that I said goes along with this. There's float and clear. So what we want to do is we want to take the the elements after the image that we do not want to be floated and clear them. And in this case, it's going to be the next figure. When the next figure starts, I want to apply the clear to that, so it's no longer floating around that previous image. So now we will just select for figure and do a clear left. So clear all left floats that happened before you. Save it and go over here. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Now things are happening more or less the way that we want them, at least in terms of organization. So I think the very last thing that I want to do here is get things spaced a little bit. So I don't want the text touching the images. I don't think I want the images touching each other either. I want to space them out a little bit, definitely push the text a little bit away. This is one of those weird situations where, well, it's not that weird. It actually happens a lot, where you want to like different values for each of the 4 directions of the padding or margin. So I want 0 on the top because I don't want to push this guy down. I do want a value here. So say, I don't know, we'll start with 1em, I guess. And then a different value in between these, like 0.5em, and then another 0 value left so they don't get pushed in. So this is going to be one of those cases where we will actually have 4 values for the padding or margin, whichever one you want to do it. I'll go ahead and do padding here. So 4 values, and these, when you put in 4 values like this is the way the 4 values go. The first value is going to be for the top padding or margin. Same rule goes for when you're doing margins or borders for that matter. The next one is going to be right. The third value is going to be for the bottom. And the fourth and last value will be for the left. Top right, bottom left. So this is something that you want to remember. You want to spend some time with it, like right away, memorizing it, this order, so that you can always with confidence put in 4 values for padding, margins, or borders and know which side is going to be affected by which value. So there are different ways that you can use this. Top right, bottom left, the way I remembered it is that it's clockwise starting from noon. Start at noon and go all the way around the clock, top right, bottom, and left. There you go. A colleague, I can't remember who, once said, no, the acronym is trouble, right? TRBL, it's trouble without the vowels. So you can remember it that way too. If you come up with a different way that's easier for you to remember it, then of course use that instead. But in any case, get this stuff remembered. This is potentially quiz material. Just let you know. I've repeated it thrice now, so you should know something's up with that. Top right, bottom left. So
for me, I've always remembered it like a clockwise directional keys on the keyboard. Top right, bottom left.
okay.
You know, I don't know. Does that make sense?
On the keyboard, it goes backwards. Like the R is to the left of T.
Well, no, but I'm thinking, you know, the arrows on your keyboard. If you go clockwise, you've got top right, bottom left.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Then you just have to remember which one to start with, right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, every clock starts at noon, right?
Yeah, right. That's right. So that's exactly how I did it too. That's how I remembered them way back in the day. Clockwise starting at noon. Okay, so top I wanted 0. Right, 0.5em I think we said. And then bottom, let's see if 1em winds up being too much, and then left 0 because I don't want to push it away from our carefully maintained margin over there. So save that and go ahead and see how this looks. And yeah, that's okay. We may want to change things when we do responsive design. If I pull this out a bit, that's starting to feel a little tight now. But not too bad though. I think we can start with that. So I think that's okay. And I just realized there's one last thing I wanted to do, which was Now, I'm not sure if it makes much sense to do it now. I wanted to show you a border radius, and we'll just do it on the bottom of the page here, starting with putting it on the footer. I don't know how I managed to skip that, but somehow I did. So let's go back up to the footer. It should have been done when we did the borders. There's the footer. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, and by the way, I mean, the name is border radius, which means you can get rounded corners on things. Boy, if you guys can see the hoops we used to have to run through for that. It's to get rounded corners on elements. It's called border radius, but you don't actually need to have a border on there to make it work. It's a little bit confusing when you're first learning it. So I do not have a border on footer. Nevertheless, I'm going to do border radius. And let's do our old friend 0.5m. And let's just see what that looks like. So there it is, and you can see, okay, it's got the border radius on all four corners. But I only want it on the bottom two corners. So this is kind of related to the top right, bottom left, except you just got to remember it starts with the top left corner and then goes around clockwise from there. So if I want 0 and 0 and 0.5 and 0.5, then I'll go ahead and do that. So border radius 0, 0, 0.5m, and 0.5m. And that should work now. It's just got it on the bottom too. But notice what's happening. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can take a look. No, not that far, I guess. You see that it's this little white corner showing down here. What is that from? Well, this is the background on the body element. The body element, we've got a purple background on the footer, but the white background of the body element actually continues quite like behind the other one, if that makes sense. So now that we've put a rounded corners on the footer, it's now showing its little corners here. And so we'll have to do the same thing for the body element. So I'm going to take this border radius and I'm going to cut it from this. And I'm going to make a compound selector up here of body and footer. Body, comma, footer. Remember, if you're selecting for two things, put a comma between them. And I'll put the border radius on both of them, the footer and the body. So now that white background should also be clipped at the corners. And there we go. The white goes away. I can still see it just a hair. Sometimes if it's showing here on some browsers, then you have to separate them and you make give a wider border radius onto the body element to make sure that that cuts further in from the footer, and so there's no risk of it being seen. But really what's happening is this is because we're zoomed so far in. If I zoom back out again, I don't think it'll be visible. Yeah, very, very slightly. Just this browser, I think. I mean, Edge is still kind of a young browser and it doesn't get everything right, although it is based on Gecko now, so it should. But
it's garbage. It's garbage. You can just say it's garbage. It's okay.
Trying to be nice to Microsoft.
Listen, they've done so well with just about everything else. They just suck at making a web browser, and that's okay. Everybody's got to suck at something.
Well, we are glad that Internet Explorer went away finally, at least, because that thing was horrific for years. So, but anyway, I think that's good enough. I don't think many people will notice that little itty bitty sliver of white down there. Okay, cool.
Can I go back to the CSS?
Yeah. So this guy right here, the border radius.
Yeah, I was just trying to type that down.
Cool. Go for it. Doggy. I'm a big fan of dogs.
Yeah, me too. I'm a big fan of animals in general. I hate people.
Cool, thank you.
I consider dogs people, so just human people. Okay, there may be something another that I've forgotten, but I think that was most or all of what I wanted to cover today. That's a lot of stuff for you guys, a lot of box model stuff. There is more box model stuff that we did not do, but I think this is a pretty good intro to it. So we did backgrounds, we did borders, including border block, which is a newer one. We did padding and margins in various ways. We did display, right? We took that span around the left double quote and we gave it a display block to put it on its own line. We did background gradients, and we did border radius as well, borders on a few things. So yeah, we covered quite a lot of stuff. I mean, this would be like in 11-week semesters that I used to teach. This would have been a couple of weeks that we covered some of this stuff here.
Beautiful.
So you guys are doing awesome. We could go a couple of different places next, either one of which would have to do with layout in some way or another. There's really something that we're going to skip, which we would do if we had more time, which is position. How to position things absolutely on the page, how to do fixed position, so you can have an element follow you up and down the page as you scroll. How to do relative position, where you can just take an element and push it just a little bit one direction or another without messing anything else up. But I think that may need to be a casualty of the tight semester that we've got here. And I think that what we're going to do when we come back on Tuesday is that we're going to go into responsive design. So there is a decent chapter on responsive design. If you're reading ahead, I'll say one more time that I do not recommend reading chapter 6 because it's outdated. It's not wrong. It's just more appropriate to a decade ago than it is to right now. So I do recommend skipping that. I would not recommend using floats for layouts now, even though we did it for quite a long time. There's no need to any longer. So while we're learning responsive design, I'll also be showing you some techniques for layout by using, in particular, Flexbox, CSS Flexbox. There are two really good tools for layout in CSS3, one of which is Flexbox, the other one of which is a CSS Grid. They're both amazingly useful, but I think Flexbox is the one that is more commonly used, even if it's only because of familiarity. And so that's the one that I think is the most important for us to cover in the class. So we'll do that next. As a reminder, we do have the midterm coming up next Thursday. So a week from today, we will be having a midterm. I will be driving up to campus. So those of you who will be on campus, you'll be meeting with me there. Tuesday, I will make sure that we have some time to go over, review what's going to be on the midterm exam. So even though we'll start out with responsive design, we won't do it very much. Some of it we'll have to hold off until Friday. Friday of next week will be about 1, going over the midterm exam, and then 2, finishing up with responsive design. Tomorrow we've got that lab session. Remember that you are bringing your HTML resume, and I'm going to be assigning you a design assignment, designing your resume with CSS, what we've learned, and that is why your recommended reading for tomorrow are those 2 sections of chapter 17. So I will go ahead and close the recording now. I'll stop the recording.